Live. All right. Live. So we will go ahead and get started. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa wala. We start mentioning the name of Allah. We praise him and ask him to bestow his peace and blessings on his messenger's family, so companions, and those who follow. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, everybody. Welcome to our usual weekly Wednesday discussion. As a reminder, every Wednesday we are going over the book Fiqh, Evolution of Fiqh from Dr. Bilal Phillips. And so for the past few weeks, we've been going over the history of fiqh and how it came to be. And today we're going to be going over section 5 of this book, which focuses on explaining the different madhabs, the different schools of thought. But before we go into that, and the chapter actually begins with kind of just a brief summary of what we've been going over the previous chapters. In previous sessions, we've spoken about how fiqh originally came to be, starting, of course, first with the source being during the revelation, during the Prophet, peace must be upon him, in which the only sources of Islamic law of that point, of course, was the Quran and the Sunnah. There was no madhhab at that point. There was no school of thought at that point because there was one direct source. But there were some certain practices of fiqh or of Islamic jurisprudence that were derived from that time, and that is, of course, the practice of ijtihad or reasoned rulings, making rulings based off of evidence that you currently have and your own reasoning. This was something that was done by Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, while revelation was coming down, and a continued practice of the companions. From there, we started speaking about the times of the Khulafa al-Rashidin, the four rightly guided caliphs, and how fiqh further began to develop around that time. During that time, we spoke about how ijma' was starting to be practiced, which is consensus amongst the scholars, as well as qiyas. Qiyas basically meaning ijtihad, making your own individual rulings based off what you know. From there, we also spoke about the through this book after the time of the Rashidin, the four rightly guided caliphs, which is the time of the Umayyad dynasty. And during this time, we explained that this was a time where the Khalifa, the caliph, the caliphate became more of like a monarchy, the leadership being based off inheritance more than based off of individual merit, and it was a very corrupted dynasty during this time, which caused a lot of the companions and the scholars to separate themselves from the caliphates. Moving to different regions was further caused the more increased practice of individual ijtihad or individual reasoned rulings. And then last week we spoke about the Umayyad dynasty and how during this time scholarship was not very respected, but at the same time the Abbasid dynasty also had a similar practice to the Umayyads, where if a scholar did not really conform to their particular public policies, that scholar would face repercussions. And during certain practices of this time, like court debates and state promotions of particular madhhabs or particular schools of thoughts, these practices further developed the divisions of different madhabs, different schools of thoughts. And so this is just a brief summary of what we discussed over the past few weeks. And due to these different incidents, this caused many scholars developing their own schools of thought based off of resources that were available to them in their own individual regions. And so this chapter, chapter 5, focuses on introducing us with a brief understanding of each madhab or each school of thought. So this is a very long chapter, and the past few chapters have been reasonably short. So for this chapter, what I think the best way for us to do is every week we will try and cover 2 to 3 madhabs that Dr. Bilal Phillips discusses in this book. For today, we'll just focus on speaking about one madhab. We'll try and keep the discussion not too long, focus on just some key facts mentioned in this chapter. Then from there, we can open the floor to comments or questions, and then from there we can, inshallah ta'ala, conclude. So Dr. Bilal Phillips begins with discussing the Hanafi madhab. This is a madhab I think a lot of us are very familiar with. It's very, probably arguably the most common madhab in our areas. The founder of this madhab was, of course, Imam Abu Hanifa, whose real name was Nu'man ibn Thabit, Abu Hanifa being, of course, his kunya or his nickname, which was a very common practice amongst the Arabs. For example, we're all very familiar with Abu Bakr. Abu Bakr was actually his nickname. May Allah be pleased with him. His real name being Abdullah ibn Uthman. So Abu Hanifa, he was born in the year 702 CE, and we're not going to go into vivid detail of these very minute facts. We'll just try and focus on kind of the big facts that's good for us to know. His father actually converted during the time of the Rashidin, during the time of the rightly guided caliphs. So he's a relatively early scholar. And his primary teacher was Hamad ibn Zayd. And the most important thing for us to know about him is that he was a very prominent scholar of hadith. Hamad ibn Zayd, and arguably one of the most prominent scholars of hadith during his time. And Abu Hanifa studied under him for about 18 years. And due to the fact that he studied under a very prominent and well-known scholar of that time, he was seen as a very valuable asset to the Islamic State of that time, the Umayyad dynasty. And so they offered him a title. They offered him a job, basically, for the government, being a qadi, or being a judge of Kufa. But due to the fact that the government was seen as very corrupt at that time, Abu Hanifa refused this position. And like we've discussed previously, during this time, you don't want to do anything to go against the Islamic State. If you do, you would face repercussions. And due to Abu Hanifa refusing this position, he was imprisoned and essentially tortured by the government, which unfortunately was a very common practice of the governments of that time. And he ended up being imprisoned all the way up to his death. A couple other, another one more key fact I wanted to share with you all in regards to Abu Hanifa. He was also considered among the tabi'un. Tabi'un being basically referring to those who are students of the companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. He was considered one of the minor students of the companions because he did work with a few of the companions and related some hadith to them. So we had some minor interactions and teachings with other companions. And so these are just some key facts about how Abu Hanifa. And so we'll go now into how his madhab, or his school of thought, kind of developed in kind of his particular practice. And so according to Dr. Bilal, his primary teaching method was based off the principles of shura, or group discussion. So essentially, in his academic setting, it was a very common practice that he would present his students with a particular issue in regards to Islamic law, and would have the students basically debate and discuss amongst one another until a consensus was reached. And there was a lot of practice of hypotheticals in this sense. And due to that, they were seen as being very similar to the early madhhab of Ahl Ra'i, being the people of opinion. And we spoke about that school of thought in previous classes. In a quick review, one of the earliest two madhabs or schools of thought were the people of hadith and the people of opinion. People of opinion being individuals who had limited access to a hadith than the people who were from the school of thought of the people of hadith. So the people of opinion depended a lot on their own individual reasoning in regards to Islamic law, while the people of the hadith focused mainly on deriving opinions purely on the subtext of the hadith. There wasn't really a lot of reasoned rulings for that particular madhab. So based off of Abu Hanifa's practice of providing hypothetical situations to his students and having them kind of discuss amongst one another particular Islamic rulings based off those situations, they were seen as very similar to the people of reason, people of opinion. So he also talks about the sources of law that was used by the Hanafi madhab. And we discussed last week as well some of the primary sources of Islamic law that are available to the Fiqh, or available to the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence. And most of them that are mentioned here are basically all exactly the same. Of course, the Quran and Sunnah. And of course, the Quran and Sunnah is the source of law for basically all of them that have all the schools of thought, of course. Ijma' of the Sahaba, Ijma', of course, being consensus. So this is another source of law for the Hanafi madhab in regards to developing their own rulings is considered a legitimate source, consensus amongst the companions, as well as individual opinion of the companions, which we also discussed last week. Qiyas, or ijtihad, as we discussed, reasons, coming up with your own reasoned rulings based off the sources available to you, but don't have an exact answer to the particular situation. Istihan, preference, another source we discussed, essentially preferring one particular piece of evidence over another based off its relevance to the particular situation. And of course, urf being local customs, which we also discussed last week. So for the Hanafi madhab, the sources of Islamic law are practically exactly the same as the sources of primary sources of Islamic law that we discussed last week. And so from here, we'll just want to talk about some of the major students of the Hanafi madhab that were instrumental to expanding the influence of this particular school of thought. One of the students that he mentioned name is Abu Yusuf Yaqub ibn Ibrahim. And just really the most important thing for us to know about him is that he was appointed the chief judge of the Islamic State under the Abbasid Empire. And due to this position of him being a chief judge, this allowed him to appoint judges for different areas of the Islamic State, of course. Of course, most of the judges that he would appoint were judges from his own particular madhab, being the Hanafi madhab. This allowed the Hanafi madhab to really expand to other areas in the Islamic State, thus increasing its influence. Another major student of the Hanafi madhab that he mentions is Muhammad ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. And he is also was given a judge position under Caliph Harun al-Rashid. And due to that position as well, also kind of further contributed to the expansion of this particular madhab. Another quick facts I want to share with everyone in regards to these two students. They also were students under Imam Malik, founder of the Maliki madhab. So, and you'll find this, that a lot of these students would study under other madhabs, under other schools of thought. And on top of that, there's students of other schools of thoughts who went to and kind of founded their own school of thought based on their own interactions with different schools of thought. So just kind of a interesting fact there, that these major students of the Hanafi madhab also studied under other imams of other madhabs, or other schools of thought. So the last thing I want to mention in regards to this particular madhab are the followers of the Hanafi madhab today. Mostly you'll be finding them in India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Turkey, and these different regions that we've mentioned previously. And this madhab also spread, especially during the time of the Ottoman Empire. And I think we see this a lot today, because whenever you interact with people from the South Asian region, Pakistan, Afghanistan, India, most of the time you'll find them following the Hanafi madhab. And one important thing I think we can get out of all this is a lot of people will follow a particular madhab based off of where they were born, right? You're not going to find many people following madhab based off individual study. It's really, a lot of times, is based off of where you were born. I remember, to go off tangent a little bit, I remember when I was speaking with one of my teachers quite a few years ago, and he had this practice of, he would ask someone, where are you from? And they would tell him, okay, I'm from this place, I'm from that place. And he would basically guess their madhab, their school of thought, based off where they were from. And most of the time he ended up being right. And the reason why I feel it's kind of important to mention this is just kind of a big reminder for us as to why we should not consider one particular madhab or school of thought as being objectively better than all the rest, and all the others are wrong. This particular one is right, because a lot of these schools of thought are followed not based off academic research, but mainly just based off of where their sphere of influence really was. And so I feel like it's important for us to mention that. And so these are really the main points of the Hanafi madhab that he mentions. And just kind of a quick preview for the remaining sessions, he goes into many other madhabs and many other schools of thought. So next time we'll be speaking about the Maliki madhab and some of the other major madhabs after that. So, wait, we have any Facebook comments? Okay, all right. So just a couple quick reminders for us as why is it good for us to speak about these topics, because I know that the topics that we are currently talking about in this Wednesday discussion is definitely pretty heavy, and we mentioned a lot of different terms that can be difficult to remember. And we're speaking about history, which isn't everyone's favorite subject. But the reason why I really think it's good for us to be learning these nuances of the history of fiqh, some of the history of the madhhab, the schools of thought, and how they came to be, is especially for those of us who are converts, is because I think this allows us to develop an appreciation for the different schools of thought that that exist today, and understand and appreciate the fact that it's okay for these different schools of thought to exist. We have, and we've mentioned this in previous sessions, we have this stigma in our Muslim community, really two different types of stigmas. One is, the schools of thought are divinely ordained. They are absolutely infallible. There's one amongst all the others that is absolutely correct and all the others are incorrect. And you find these practices amongst the Muslim community where people won't even pray next to another person if they're following a different school of thought than they are. That's one extreme. The other extreme, though, of course, is completely rejecting the concept of the schools of thought, completely rejecting the concept of following a school of thought, saying that this is not needed, this is just causing division. These people are just making up their own things. I'm not even going to follow anything. I'm just going to follow the Quran and the Sunnah. But at the same time, it's important for us to understand, how do we know who was it that actually compiled the ahadith, and who is it actually interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah? It's through these amazing scholars throughout our Islamic history who dedicated their lives to understanding the Quran, to understanding the ahadith and the proper way of differentiating, what is sahih, authentic hadith, from da'if, from weak hadith. These practices is what allows us to practice Islam the way that we are able to today. So it's important for us to have that balance. And for us, learning the history of how the science of fiqh or Islamic jurisprudence was developed, and how the different madhhab or the different schools of thought were developed, can help us gain that appreciation and the importance of having a balance. And at the same time, for those of us who want to take our Islamic academia to the next level and want to actually study our own, study a madhhab or study a school of thought, us kind of opening our eyes to the history of these schools of thought can help us make that particular choice, if we choose to make that choice. And so this is what I wanted to mention before closing. I know today that the session is a little short, but only because we're starting to go into a little heavier territory. We're mentioning a lot of historical names and factors, and so I want to just make sure that we don't kind of lose ourselves in all the information. So I felt kind of appropriate to kind of take it one step at a time with this particular chapter. So next time we'll probably go over 2 madhhabs instead of 1, since we know we're one relatively quickly. So from here, I would like to open the floor for any comments or questions from both the Zoom and the Facebook. And if there aren't any, we can just go ahead and close the session early so we can start preparing for iftar, inshallah.
Here. I don't know if you know the answer to this, but I've been asked by a couple converts in the past, because they like certain things of one madhab versus another. And again, I don't know if you know the answer. We should just ask Sheikh Jassy, but I thought it would be beneficial to ask, is it possible to practice or to follow certain aspects of one or the other?
Very, very good question, Sister Nahela. And actually, I myself have asked this question a variety of times. Sheikh Johnson is definitely the best person to ask, or someone of knowledge, the person to ask. All I can really say is, I know a lot of scholars say it's better to follow just one madhab, only because it takes there's so much information to learn in just one madhab that it can become really confusing if you mix and match. But that being said, the best thing I can say is I really can't fully answer that question. I think the best thing for us to do is ask our own individual scholar, because I think a different scholar will give you a different answer, if I'm being completely honest with you. Some scholars will tell you it's best to follow one madhab and you shouldn't mix and match. Other scholars might tell you that with some of the smaller things, maybe it's okay to do so. The best advice I can give is speak to your own individual imam, ask them their opinion, and then go off it based off that particular opinion. Because I don't want to say anything that ends up being wrong.
Jazakallah khair.
Any other? Okay, we got some. May Allah bless you with my first comment ever. Greetings from California. Jazakallah khair, sister. Welcome. Greetings to you from Texas. This is from Sister Leah Ibarra. Okay, any other questions or comments? If not, we can go ahead and close, inshallah. All right, let's go ahead and close, inshallah, so we can all get ready for iftar. Allahumma subhanahu wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, I will see you all tonight for our Quran Rush program.